All right.
Perfect. Hi, everybody. I am Mary Harmon Young. I'm a realtor down in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. You can probably hear by my accent. I'm one of the moderators for Lab Coat Agents, and we are excited to have y'all here today. I'm going to turn it over to Guillermo for him to introduce himself now.
Hey there, Mary. How's everybody doing? My name is Guillermo Serafin. I'm also one of the moderators with Lab Coats. I am from California, work both Southern and Northern California, and I'm glad to be here. Excited to talk about the topic of, you know, finding all the businesses that are going to need our help.
Absolutely. And we're excited today to have Tracy. So, Tracy, kind of tell us what you want everybody to know about you.
Okay, well, hi, I'm Tracy Gunn. I'm a serial entrepreneur. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today and my experience and kind of how I wound up talking about this topic. But I represent all the entrepreneurs in the world who are starting 100 different things in 100 different directions and yet still want to sell. And we know how hard that's going to be. So we're going to talk about that. So I'm glad to be here. And thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, why don't we get started? Tell us about yourself. Tell us about, fill us in.
Sounds great. Okay, so a couple years ago, I'll say this, like I love business. I love starting new things. I'm like the 0 to 1 person, not like the finisher. So I like to start new things. I like to start new projects. So I had a candy store and then I kind of got bored with that. It was going great. So then I started a restaurant. And then I got a little frustrated with my landlord there. So then I started another restaurant and then I started another candy store. And so 2019, I kind of hit the wall, had a grandbaby that was new. And I kind of was like, I don't want to do this anymore. You know, those late nights working 18 hours, I was running 4 businesses all by myself. And money was good, but it was still a lot of work. And I was tired. And I just was like, I don't want to do this anymore. You know what? I'll just sell. And like most business owners, I thought, oh, it's going to be easy, right? Everybody wants this. I didn't want it, but I figured everybody else might. And so I hired a broker and was super stressful. And I like laid it all out for him, all my babies that I had created. And he basically looked at me and he was like, Tracy, there's nothing worth selling here. You should just liquidate everything. And it was like a punch in the face. I was like, what do you mean? Why? And he didn't really get into it with me. He just basically said, yeah, it's not really a good fit for me. It's not worth selling, just liquidate. And so that point, I really had to decide for myself. First of all, after I cried and I put on my big girl panties, I decided, okay, can I fix this? Is this worth fixing? Am I going to keep going? Do I just set a match and like run away? Like, what do I do? And so, what I decided to do was I didn't understand why he didn't think that it was worth anything or any of them were worth anything because they were making me money. But what I decided to do was figure it out. And that's kind of what I did. And so within 3 months, I found a buyer sitting at my bar for the one business. And then after that, COVID happened and some things changed. But the gist of it all is I realized number one, I don't want another business owner to feel that way like I felt, which is you built this beautiful thing, you think, and when you're tired of it, you think, oh, somebody should want this. There's value here. And if I had listened to him, I would have just dissolved it. 42 people out of work, all the things I had built would have been for nothing. And the reality is that with just a few things that I figured out, or if he had just encouraged me just a little bit about fixing some things, it could have had a really different ending with him. And my experience with him as a broker would have been really different. So that's kind of catapulted me into this new thing that I like talking about, which is warning business owners, like you think you have this $1 million business, but you don't, and you probably should fix something. So I don't know if that's a good synopsis of where I'm coming from.
That's a very good synopsis. And as somebody who's been self-employed since I was 17 and I'm 46 now, I completely understand where you are coming from in the sense of when you first learned that you didn't have a business that was sellable. And now that I do this, helping people structure those things, I can firsthand understand what he was looking at. But I also know that our industry doesn't do the best job in training us as brokers to come in and be that helping hand, that nurturing hand to help people get to that point where they can actually turn their dreams into something that they can sell. And it's something that you don't have to be in the, and correct me if I'm wrong from what you've discovered, it's not something that you really want to wait till you're ready to sell to start fixing. The sooner you get it done, the better it's going to be for you.
Absolutely. That's absolutely true. And the thing is, like, I found a buyer in 3 months. I kind of gave myself 6 months. I was still running 4 businesses. It was just pre-COVID, so it wasn't all of that nonsense. But I mean, if I could fix a few things and make it sellable, maybe not for the millions I had hoped for, but certainly enough to get me out and happy, then certainly everybody has some things they could tweak, even just to get themselves out of pain in their business. Because I'll tell you, when I fixed a few things that made it a little bit more of a transferable business, more profit, put some systems in place, all of a sudden I didn't hate it as much anymore. And that's a natural consequence for that. So you're exactly right. And again, I think, my broker that I keep going to name him. That's not nice. I'm not going to do that. But, if he had just like given me a little bit of direction about like where he got that whole idea from, about why he didn't think it was worth selling, that would have really helped me a lot. And so that's usually what I wind up talking about is like, why is it priced or not priced well? Why is it not sellable? Right? Because most of us have no idea. And that's amazing that you encourage people and help them in their way. But you're exactly right. He was not equipped to help me. And it also wasn't an easy sale for him, which I get. Like, that was his gig. He wanted something that was going to be easy for him. But if he had shifted just a little bit, it could have come back to him and he would have gotten a commission on it instead of leaving me on my own.
What would you say is the first, like, if right now somebody wanted to watch this and take the top 3-5 things that they should be looking at their business right now, whether they're thinking about selling or not? Because like you said, if you make those tweaks, and like I said, I do this so I understand it, if you make the tweaks, it's going to make their business run even better. So what are those 3-5 things that somebody could start looking at or thinking about or start reading about how they can improve that you recommend?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I do like a 3-punch, right? I start with even just not even looking at what is the business, but what do you actually want? I mean, when we start our businesses, we're excited and we have this very specific idea of what we're trying to do. We have a pretty clear idea of how we're going to get there. But once we get that started, we never take the time to think about what does the end game look like, right? What target are we aiming for? What are we aiming for Los Angeles, California, or Seattle? Like, which one are we aiming? Like, where are we going? And so often we just keep adding things, adding like crazy house that has rooms, just keep building onto it with no game plan about where we're going. So the first thing I usually encourage our people to do is to think about their exit plan. Like, what do you want? Like, I want it to be out of my businesses. But others just want to not be in so much pain. Others want a little bit more time freedom or more profit, or like, what is it that they want? And so we usually help them figure out their exit plan or their exit strategy. And then we also have them do a number, right? So if I wanted 150,000 for my business and I just was ready to be out, well, then at least now I know I have a number I'm aiming for. So then when I get to step number 2, which is just do a quick down and dirty valuation of like, what is your business actually worth, right? Because most business owners, you probably all know that we have no idea what it's worth. Until we're ready to sell, we have no idea how it even is calculated. And then there's, so we usually do just a down and dirty, like, what's your profit? Are you corporately run, meaning like you have a full C-suite, or are you like small business owner, you're doing an SDE? And so we usually kind of establish from there, what kind of business do you have? And then what would it be valued at today? Like, if you didn't change anything based on your profit, maybe you have some kind of proprietary, what do you call IP? we try to come up with like a down and dirty number of, okay, where are you right now? Now, my broker told me my business was worth 0, so I had a lot to make up there. But that's a second thing. So I say, first exit plan, like figure out what the heck you want and how you want to get there and what would be acceptable to you. Number 2 is, what is it worth right now? So that way you know the gap between what you want and where you are. And then the third thing, the easiest thing I think, is really think about the things that give you the most pain. The things, what we usually do is we have them go through some kind of time diary for the first week or 2 to see what are they spending a lot of their time on, because often it's something that they haven't solved the problem or put a framework in place that they constantly have to keep going back to, and that's why they're frustrated. So we usually find all the pain points or list them all out, and then quickly pick a few where they're going to have a few quick wins to get those things off their plate forever. And they might have to check in, but they're never going to have to do it again. So those are usually the 3 things, because once you start picking off your things and you're like more aware of what your business is worth and what you actually want, right? You took the time to figure that out. At that point, now it's just really designing your roadmap of how you're going to get there. And that's kind of what I did for myself, not really knowing, just trying to figure out, okay, what can I get rid of to make my life easier and not want to kill everybody today, right? What will make me not so angry with my staff today, my customers today? What will make my life easier today? And profitability. So for me, like I installed a liquor inventory system. I didn't realize that one of my bartenders was robbing me blind. And all of a sudden, magically, I was more profitable once I put that in place. That was a quick, easy thing. Or a customer loyalty program where I could know exactly who my customers are, how much they were spending, what they were buying, how often they came in. I didn't have that in place. And that was just turning on a switch in my point of sale system. So there's little things you can do with tech or delegating or VAs that just make your life easier. So first, exit plan. Second, what's the current business value? And third, how are you going to bridge the gap and make your life easier, give you more time freedom, more profitability, and just overall not make you miserable. So those are my quick things. Hope that makes sense.
That does make sense. And if we went into them a little bit, like, so if we take the first one, the exit plan, what do you recommend people when, like for me, example, a lot of my businesses are, my kids are going to end up running them when I'm no longer here.
Right.
Is succession plans and things of that nature. Do you have any best practices? Like I build my businesses so that even if my kids don't want to, they're still going to be a valuable asset to them that they can hire somebody else to manage for them, and they still retain ownership. So when you're talking about exit plans, there's different levels of exit, right? There's completely, I'm no longer tied or benefit from. And then, do you want to exit from parts of your business or all of the business?
Right.
You can sell part of it and keep and retain the other part. And,
exactly.
What are
you're exactly right. Yeah. And
yeah.
that's the thing. It's like succession plan, like, well, let's say emergency, we work with them on succession plans as well, because what if, right? I just got back from Italy for 2 weeks. And what if something had happened? The mess of my businesses, right, from back then, what would happen to it? It just would fall apart, right, back then. But now there's a very clear layout of what to do in case of emergency. That's the succession planning part. But then the exit planning part is, okay, if I don't ever find a buyer, will it run without, right? For my family, because my kids are not going to come back and run my candy store. They're not going to come back and run my restaurants. They're just not going to do it. But it could be an asset for them. And you're exactly right. Like hiring, like setting it up in a way that somebody could jump in and pretty quickly figure it out and keep it going. And that's exactly what we help them figure out. And then when I say exit plan, a lot of people are like, well, I'm not ready to sell yet. But exit planning really, I think, is more about physically exiting the business, going from being the one person who's running everything to the person who's kind of overseeing everything and just giving it a touch point every once in a while. And some people don't want to leave their businesses entirely. So then figuring out, well, how much do you want to work? Do you want to work 10 hours a week? And what do you want to work on? And figuring that out. And like you said, you've set it up that way, which is amazing. But how many, let's be honest, how many business owners have set up their businesses in that way?
No, I completely understand. And even
Yeah.
like if we take your restaurant for an example, and I
Mhm.
don't know anything about it, but just so that people have an idea of what to start looking at, like if you own the real estate and the restaurant, if it's all yours, you could segment so that you retain ownership of the real estate and sell the restaurant business for somebody else to run, and they have to pay the lease to you. So you're still, now you have a
Mhm.
passive investment. But at first, if you didn't understand that you could do that, people might think, well, if I have to sell the restaurant, I got to sell the real estate. And you don't necessarily need to do that.
That's exactly right. It makes me think of, I had this gentleman that I worked with. He had been running his business for 52 years. So he was 72. He was doing motorcycle parts. And over time, since the 70s, he had started with doing retail, and then he started manufacturing. He had 2 factories overseas. This was after COVID, so he had some complications there. He had wholesale, he had online, he had his retail, and he recognized that he had not set it up in a way that he could sell it as one thing. So he started carving off the pieces, right? So first thing he sold was his e-com, because that was an easy thing to sell for somebody else to absorb. And he kept the pieces like you're talking about, the real estate, the factories is what he wound up keeping still, because he was able to separate those things. But it wasn't until he started thinking about, well, how can I make this, right? I mean, what if you could sell 5 things instead of one thing, you're probably going to be better off,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
And
no, exactly.
exactly, that's exactly. And the real estate, I mean, again, every state's different. In New Hampshire, anybody could sell a business, but if there's real estate involved, it has to be through a broker. And that's kind of, I don't know about other states, I just know about New Hampshire from that perspective. But again, if you have the real estate, you'd carve that, keep that forever. But the other part about this is that, you know, I think in the title was talking about, that there's 12 million small business owners who are going to retire in the next 5 years. 12 million. I mean, that's a huge number. And you match that with that up to 85% of small businesses that are listed don't sell. Well, so what happens? Right? Do they just disappear? And they're going to retire. I mean, so it's about fixing the business so that even if they don't find a buyer, it could still pay them. They could get themselves out of it. Because I mean, most business owners are going to be bored within a year, let's be honest. But also it's about saving those businesses that are just going to disappear from our economy. If
Right.
12 million businesses just disappear because they couldn't find the buyer. So I also, yeah. So, I mean, so it's like those kind of things, like there's so many things to think about, and 12 million of them, that's the other part. Not only do we as small business owners not think ahead about what we want or how we're going to get there or what our number is or what it looks like to be able to have a transferable, sellable business, but now you compare that to that most businesses don't sell. And then on top of that, that 12 million of them are going to sell or be for sale, and there's not enough buyers. Now what?
Yeah.
Like,
And I think that the big takeaway, for one of the big takeaways for everybody watching in Lab Coats, is that most of these businesses, the ones that are going to retire, I would say 50-60% of them own the real estate that they're doing business in. And if they don't, they at least control long-term leases that are still something that you can make a commission of. If everybody's thinking, how does this impact me and how can I make money? And then at the end of the day, they're also, if they're retiring from their business, they might be looking to relocate. So they're going to have assets that they're going to need to sell on that end as well. So you'll run into multiple transactions and ways that you'll be able to help these people. It's just about making the connections, and you'll make your business better by understanding how to value businesses. And if we go on to that second piece of, talk a little bit about, how did you go about learning, that every business, it has different types it's valued by different multiples, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's different ways to calculate what a business is worth. Like what you make isn't necessarily what it's worth. You got to take away taxes, insurance, all the other stuff. But if you could speak a little bit about that, how did it come to you when you had to learn about what the different multiples are for the different types of businesses?
Right. And again, it's changing all the time, right? You see these amazing stories in the news about this business that did a roll up, right? They combined all these little stores together or these businesses together and became worth more because there were more of them. So for example, I own a candy store. Okay. And at one point I had 2, now I have 1. But if I had 10, the multiple on that's going to be way higher because now I'm a chain versus my little itty bitty 1. The 1 is based basically on your profit. And I usually explain, and again, everybody has a different way. This is just really to get people's feet wet, to kind of, it's like a reality check. Like when most people think their business is worth, oh, I want 300,000, I want 400,000, I want 500,000. It's like, well, what's your annual profit? What did you report to Uncle Sam? Well, I reported 100,000. Well, okay. And are you working in your business every day? Well, yeah. Well, who do you think's going to buy that business for $500,000? I mean, somebody, if they really wanted it, might, but it's like a house. If it's in an area they want to buy in, right? And it has the inherent value there, but it's always worth what someone's willing to buy it for. Right. So we usually talk about it just from a profit perspective, because I just want, often this is the first educational piece about this. This is the first time they're thinking about, oh, what is my business worth? Right. I would say out of like 100 business owners, if you ask them today, do you know what your business is worth and how to figure it out? I would say at least 95 of them would not, which is a huge gap of knowledge, especially because we're trying to build valuable businesses. So how can we build something valuable if we don't know where the value comes from? So we usually talk about it from that. And often the people that I'm working with are people who've been doing their business 30, 40 years. They had a discussion with their accountant once about selling someday, right? They're the only ones, they've been doing everything. They're not working super hard anymore because they figured out how to do it real easy. They're not so strapped for cash. They're not pushing really hard. Sometimes they don't have websites. Sometimes they've never been on a Zoom call. Sometimes, like, and when I have my first meet with them, I'm like, okay, down in the Zoom, you have to like hit this, you have to hit that, whatever, because they're not as technical. And so the people that we're talking about, that especially the ones that are going to retire, they're on the lower end of things. So we usually do it by, if you're under 250,000 in profit, you're probably only going to get a 1 to 2x multiple, right? So you take your profit, you can add back in, but again, when we're doing it just like through a webinar or something, we're doing it pretty down and dirty. We're not doing the full out valuation. I just want them to get a sense of where they are and how they can quickly figure it out. So that kind of opens the door for them about what they could tweak, right? So when I installed my liquor inventory, all of a sudden I was way more profitable because they weren't robbing me blind. So all of a sudden I went from 0 valuation to a higher valuation because I had more profit. So those little things, but anyway, so we usually do on the SDE side where we teach them how to add back in, right? And
can you
sorry.
Can you let everybody know what that means?
Oh, sorry. Seller's discretionary earnings. So if your business is not being run by a C-suite, right? CEO, CFO, CM, like that, it's not professionally run, chances are you're going to be listed under your SDE, seller's discretionary earnings. So it's basically your profit. But when you think about your profit, you need to think about the fact, like, let's just say in my restaurant, I was managing the restaurant. So if I'm selling my business, I'm not going with the business. I mean, sometimes you can work out details, but the gist is I didn't want to have the business anymore. So I needed to add back or take away from my profit the cost it would be to hire a manager because I'm not going to be there anymore, right? So let's just say my profit was 200,000, but now I have to hire a manager or the next people will have to hire a manager. So we would take away 50,000 from, or 60 or 70, depending on what you want for your average salary for that. And you can look that up online, like what's an average restaurant manager cost, so on and so forth. But you can take that away from the profit to get a more realistic view. But you also, let's be honest, most business owners use their businesses kind of as little piggy banks. So they took their whole family to France for 3 weeks and wrote it off. Or they have their fancy car and they write it off. All the extra things they're deducting from their profit, they can add that back in. So you can do those two things to get like a really clear number of what your profit really is versus the legal way of, we kind of don't want to pay all the taxes we have to. We have these legal loopholes. So you do that. So you take your profit. I always say, like, what did you report to Uncle Sam last year? It's just an easy number. So let's just say it was 100,000. Well, you're under 250,000 for your total profit. So for that, you're probably not going to get more than 1 to 1.5x. So your business could be worth 100 to 150,000. But now if you go up from 250 to, let's say, 600 or 700, now you're at like a 2 to maybe a 3, maybe, if you could find the right buyer and it was really transferable to business.
And
so then you take, yeah.
For those that may not understand what the 1 to 2 to 3x, can you explain what that actually means?
Sure. So in other words, like, your value is your profit and times a multiple, right? Now, if it's a really hot industry, sometimes they're paying 15, 20, 30 times your annual profit because they really want your business and it's in a really hot market, and it's, for whatever reason, somebody's really anxious to buy your business, you can get a higher multiple. But so if you take, let's just use the example of 100,000 for profit, that's probably only going to get a 1 to 1.5 multiple. So you take your 100,000 times 1.5, your value would be 150,000. But if you, let's say, had a business that was having a value or annual profit of $750,000, well, now you're obviously, it's a much more profitable business. So people are willing to pay more for a more profitable business, right? So they might pay you 2, 3, 4 times your annual profit just because they know within a few years it'll pay for itself. And then they can guarantee that money for years to come. So does that make a little bit more sense? So as a professionally run one, now you're talking EBITDA, which there's multiple charts, and every year it's a little bit different, and it depends on the industry and how, like, whether it's a hot market or a dying market, right? How many people are buying newspapers right now?
Right.
Versus, right? Or e-com. E-com often sells at a higher multiple, but newspapers not so much. So it just depends on the industry, but that's why we usually try to go down in, like, it's just a quick and dirty version is profit times, depending on how much profit, the more profit you have every year, chances are people will pay you a higher multiple. So 2, 3, 4 times what your annual profit is. And that's usually how we get there.
Awesome. Thank you for explaining that. And then a couple things just to make it relevant to most real estate agents and brokers. A couple things. One, we as brokers do all the different roles. And like you said, if a restaurant owner is going to sell it, but they manage it, they have to now take away from their profit what it costs to manage that. The same thing as brokers and agents, you have to build your systems to know, like, what are all the things that I'm doing or that you're doing that's somebody else would have to pay somebody else to do. And that's you're gonna come into consideration when you're trying to figure out your valuation. So that's why I'm sure you push hard and telling people that they got to build their systems and their processes, because that's what people buy, right? People buy systems and processes that create predictable results, no matter who's doing them.
That's exactly right. And the thing is so my example of the gentleman who ran his business for 52 years, he knew all the things. They were all in his head. But he wasn't going with the business. So he had to understand, first of all, he knew he would have to earn out, meaning he would have to be getting all this systematized and teaching whoever was going to buy it all the things that he knew just intrinsically. But you're exactly right. It's like getting all the things out. And that's part is, step one is getting yourself out of the business. If you want to sell the business, like a quick, easy way is, all right, so if you went on vacation, I just got back from Italy 2 weeks. And let's say I wanted to extend it 2 more weeks. Could I? What would happen to the business? Would it grow? Would it fall apart? Would it be a mess? Like, what would happen if I just disappeared for a month and I didn't put my fingers in at all? If you think about your business like that, what is going to be the first thing to go? What's the things that are going to be a disaster when I get back, right? And if it's not going to keep growing, you don't have a sellable business. And that's exactly what I found and figured out in my own, was that there was nothing to sell because I was the lady juggling everything. I was the lady spinning the plates and keeping them spinning, right? And when one would go, I would rush and fix it instead of putting systems in place or delegating and hiring to get other people responsible for doing it, so that if I disappeared, it keeps going.
Right. And then for you, what would you like? For me, I always recommend people to read the book Traction. I call it the workbook to business, because it really helps you dial in your KPIs and things that you should be tracking. They talk about in that book how you should be able to have 5 to 15 things that if you were stuck on an island and that's all you could get from your company was these 5 or 15 KPI numbers, that you would know the health of your business. Right. Is there any other books or anything that you recommend for somebody thinking like, man, I got to tighten up my business? What would you recommend for them to read? I recommend Traction. What would you recommend?
That's a great one. I mean, I go back to the beginning, Michael Gerber, right? The E-Myth. I mean, it's such a simple book, but it's really like, do you own a business? So many people identify with the business, like Susie the pie maker is like the example in that book, but it's right. Classic for a reason. It's so basic. But somebody handed me that book when I first started my first business, and she said, do you want to be a business owner or do you want to be the candy lady? Right? Because those are 2 different things. And so if I didn't want to have to be the lady behind the counter forever, I had to figure out how it was working, right? Assess how does this work? How is it working? Where do I get my customers from? All of those things, right? And then I had to make sure, systematize them and create the framework so that every person who stands behind my counter, let's say, is doing it the same exact way every time, so that my customers know exactly what they're getting, right? That's kind of what you're talking about, is that how do you get, and it's, yes, it is a basic one, but sometimes the simplest thing remind us, because we get so far into our businesses. I'm in 17 years in, and I've forgotten those basic things from the beginning sometimes, because we just get busy and we're just, oh, we got this. And so, I think I always recommend go back to the beginning. Like, we had a plan when we started. Why don't we have a plan once we're going? Like, once we're making money, why don't we have a plan? Why don't we take 5 minutes? Like, we all say, oh, I'm going to create a budget this year, and then it never happens. Or I'm going to clean up that problem, or I'm going to hire somebody to do that, or I'm going to fix this. Or I had another gentleman, he's an electrical company, and every night he would write down what all of his guys were doing the next day and send him a picture of what they were doing every night. 35 years in. Well, I mean, so I had him hire a VA to do that. We figured out a system for that. And all of a sudden now he's got 5 extra hours a week, because, right. But he's and that's what I find, especially with people who've been in business a long time, is they're just very comfortable and they just have accepted that that's it. But you're exactly right about the KPIs. Like, what are the things that you could look at to say, how are we doing? Are things on fire, or are things going smooth, right? And we all should have some kind of dashboard or some kind of tracking methodology in which we can see, are things on a good path or a bad path, right? even if it's just looking at your bank accounts and your deposits, like for me, with retail and restaurant, you can see your credit card deposits. You know how things are going. Or I can see from my staff how their tips are, their credit card tips, and I can tell who's doing a good job and who's not doing. There are things in every business that tell the story, and that's
Right.
exactly what you're talking about. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, and I think that leads into that last step of, you know, getting rid of the pain, right? Where you, in order to know how to get rid of your pain, you got to know where the pain is coming from. So that's what the KPIs will do, is help you determine where that's coming from. And this has been awesome and amazing. And I don't know if we have any questions, but before we go to that, I think I'd, you know, get your take on, you know, I had the privilege of being able to listen to Alex Hormozy speak in person a couple years ago, and one of the things that he said, which was pretty awesome, was, you know, you have to look at your business, you know, because your customer experience, like you said, with the pie maker, Susie the pie maker, like your customer experience is going to, you know, make you or break you. And if somebody told you you can no longer get any new business by any other means besides somebody of your past clients sending somebody to you, how different would your customer experience be?
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly. Well, we don't think about it. We just keep going. I think, you know, we're as business owners, right? We're not often strategic we don't always think about, we're just excited about the next thing. And we kind of do things willy-nilly, when really what we need to do, like, this is math. It's basic math, right? If you figure out what made that customer stick, how many are them sticking, if you can see that you're losing, you know, 5 out of every 10, well, you have a problem. Dumping more money into marketing is not going to fix that. You might get more, but you're going to lose them too, right? And so you're exactly, it's just, I don't know that as business owners that we take enough time to really stop and look at what we're doing and why.
I think that's a, you know, that's a common question we get in the group in Lab Coats is, I have X amount of dollars a month and I want to, you know, get more business. What should I invest in? And my comment to everybody is always, and it's not something, it's not a sexy comment, but it is, the first thing you got to do is look into your business and see what's making you money, where are you losing money, and figure out how you can plug the holes before you pour more water in.
Right. Fixing the leaky buckets. Exactly. And because otherwise it's just like an effort in futility. You're just continuing the cycle when you could stop it, right? Or like that gentleman who got rid of that one job that was taking up every night at 9 o'clock. He solved that forever for himself. And all of a sudden, now he's got an extra 20 hours. I mean, who wouldn't be happy with 20 hours a month extra?
No, exactly.
I mean,
Mary, do we have any questions? Let's see if anybody.
I think you're on mute. Nope.
Sorry. Haven't seen any come through. Jake, do we have any of Facebook? I guess my question is more just a generic one, is like, if you could wave a magic wand and tell people like 2 things, you know, like to do this week to check in, what's like not easy as in easy, but like something that everybody can do without having to go out and buy a new QuickBooks or anything like that?
Yeah. I would say, I mean, again, I go back to my first things. Like, I am on this mission about exit planning, and exit planning, to me, and again, I'm saying it so much that maybe other people are like, ooh, I don't want to think about it. It's just your down and dirty of like, what do you want? Why do you want it? Where are you going? How are you going to get there? Right? What's the destination? You know, I used to have an airport restaurant, and the pilots used to tell me that they file their flight plan. And there's this rule. Oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank. I still have a little jet lag. But anyway, the thing is like, they file their flight plan, but if they're just 1 degree off, they could wind up in Toronto instead of LA, because it just keeps, and that's what we do as business. Like, we never take the time to think about, where are we? Like, and why are we even doing this, right? Sometimes we do things and we don't even know why we're doing them. And this is not a beat up entrepreneurs, because like I know some people who work in pretty big corporations and they don't do this stuff either. Half the time they're doing things because they've always done them. They're spending millions and millions of dollars. They're $1 billion company and they have no idea why they even do it, or if it, and they don't have any KPIs about if it's even working. This is not uncommon for anybody in business. But
no, well, to be honest, if we were good with money and if we were good with things like that, we might have been an accountant. We wouldn't have been an entrepreneur to begin with.
Right.
So this is already accessible for all of us, but it's just reality.
it is. It is. And that's the other part. It's like, we get off track and then we lose track of like, so I don't know, you all are real estate. I mean, the thing is, you would never build your dream house without a plan. You would never, right? You wouldn't hire a contractor who didn't have a plan or a budget. You would never do any of that. You wouldn't invest the time, money, and energy into building your dream thing. And yet that's exactly what we do with our businesses. We don't have our plans done. We have our starting plans and we're building the airplane in the sky, as it's flying. But the simple fact, so that's what I would say. Do your exit plan. Just take an hour and think about, like we all did this in elementary school, right? Who, what, where, when, why, and how. Like, just do that for your business. And think about, and that if you could wave the wand, what's the one thing that keeps you up at night that you wish you could just get yourself out of? And then come up with a plan to fix that one thing. Because that one thing it'll start that whole snowball effect, right? Once you get, so this gentleman that we were working with that got the 5 hours a week is just like, I don't know how I'm gonna fix my business and work on my exit, planning towards it and build on my systems. I'm like, just start. And we did that one thing, and all of a sudden he had 5 hours extra a week to work on getting out of his business and figuring out what he could fix, what levers should he be pushing. That plan helped him filter everything he was doing from that going forward so that it was more effective. And it wasn't just willy-nilly, like, I think this might be a good idea. No, because he was like, nope. Every time somebody shows me a restaurant now, I have people like all the time they come, as I had one that was 6,500 square feet and one that was a smaller one. And people come like, oh, will you take over this one? There's a lot of restaurants out there. Anyway, every time I look, I'm like, oh, that's a really good. And then I'm like, no, this is not what I want in my life anymore, right? I go back to, what do I really want? Do I want to be doing that again and telling this story again in 5 years? No, I do not. So I have to stop myself. But now, because I've defined it, not just what opportunities present themselves am I going to chase, right? And I think, getting us to really be clear about what we want. And that could be, for some people, that's just having enough money to be comfortable. For some people, it's just more time freedom, right? They don't want to work 40, 50, 60 hours a week, right? Some people want to build $1 billion business. That's a very different, like their plan is very different than maybe, Pat, who owns the jewelry store downtown. I mean, there's no right or wrong, but it's just defining for yourself what you want. And that way you can make the right decisions and you'll just naturally be guided to choosing the right things. Hope that makes sense.
That makes lots of sense. And great question, Mary. I think as real estate agents and brokers, if you're watching this, the one thing I would say is ask yourself, if you couldn't give anybody any guidance to run your business and you had to step out of it, what would the instructions be that you would leave for them before you could no longer give any guidance? So if somebody, I won't say, I mean kidnapping, just as in to get you a mental picture. If somebody kidnapped you out of your business, what would be that note you left behind? And that's your systems and processes. And that's the one thing you should really work on. And and that's pretty much what I would say. Mary, do you want to wrap us up or?
Sure. So thank you so much for all your insight, Tracy. Tell us if somebody really just thinks of something in the middle of the night, wants to reach out to you, is that, where would you send them to? Your website, Insta,
Yep.
what?
Yeah, we have a website where we have some free training where people, it walks them through how to create their first exit plan, how to create their first valuation, and how to identify their roadmap of opportunity, right? So we have some free training. It's getexitable.com. And then the other encouragement I would just say, you all are brokers, and I forget, I wasn't really thinking that you all have your own businesses, but you do, right? I was thinking like you guys are going to also, but so you have that. Now that you have that experience, as you can think about it for yourself, now you also have the opportunity that your customers, that you could help guide them, right? If 12 million businesses are going to be for sale, some of them are going to be looking for you guys. And if you could help them, right, you hope, right? And if you could help them to get on track, to make it more transferable, like think about, and just like Guillermo, sorry, I just said, like, if you removed you, what's going to fall apart? Let's fix those things. And then you'll have a sellable business, right? Maybe not for the billions, but let's be honest, most of the small business owners are depending on selling so they can retire. So most of them are going to be willing to do something, right? But you guys have it both. Like you fix your own, then you can help fix theirs and then get paid on that. That's amazing.
Yes. Perfect. So get exitable. I can't even say it.
Yes, I know. It's like, it's a made up word, but it defines it so perfect. Getexitable.com.
Getexitable.com. Perfect. Well, all right, y'all, last chance to submit any questions. Any others, Jake, on Facebook? I don't want to leave anybody out. Doesn't look like it. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your awesome time today, Tracy, and Guillermo, for your insight as well. If you have any questions, reach out. In the Lab Coach group on Facebook or Instagram, or reach out to you at getexitable.com. Thanks, everybody. I hope y'all have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.